There have been a number of BYU fans who have been upset with the seeming inability for BYU football to match what BYU basketball is doing on the recruiting front. Well, this week could go a long way towards changing that. Allow me to explain.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you for being everydayers right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. This is your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars, and today's show is brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. All right, let's dive right in on today's show. And BYU football has a huge week in front of them. What do I mean by that? Well, it might be the biggest single recruiting week of this period for BYU. Now, a lot of you may understand, some of you may not. The period beginning late May, I guess more mid-May to the month through the month of June. So about a month and a half period is open for high school prospects to take official visits to the universities of their choosing. Well, BYU, much like the rest of the universities around the country, have been inviting a number of athletes to come and check out campus, see what it's all about. Cyrus Polo, a very highly thought of linebacker prospect out of Southern Utah, just finished an official visit yesterday. We'll see what happens with that. But this coming week for BYU, there are a number of high-level athletes from all over the country, quite literally, coming to Provo. I mentioned in the open of today's show, there's been a lot of BYU fans who had some angst about the BYU football program and this, like the seeming inability for BYU football to match what BYU basketball is doing on the recruiting front. This week could change, I think, a lot of that narrative if BYU is successful on the recruiting trail with these official visits coming to Provo. Now, some of the guys that are coming in are already committed. Guys like Blake Bryce, Tyler Payne, who we've had on this show. They have already committed to BYU. They're just making their formal official visit to campus to check things off and make sure that it feels like it's the right option for them. The other thing is BYU is bringing in another prospect who's already committed to another university, but this is, as far as I'm aware, the only other official visit he's making outside of the school that he is formally committed to, and that's Sam Turner. Now, Sam Turner is from Georgia, a place that BYU has made a concerted effort this recruiting cycle to get in and recruit. Trey Alexander, obviously from last year's recruiting class, is from there. But Sam Turner, a wide receiver prospect, an 88, near four-star territory for him, recently committed to Georgia Tech on June 9th. But according to reports, still plans to make his official visit to BYU this week. Could BYU flip him? Could they get Trey Alexander talking to him? Because I do believe that they are connected via their high school days. Could he convince him to flip his commitment to BYU? We'll see. But that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. Like I said, Sam Turner knocking on the door of four-star status. You've got guys like Siosua Vete, his brother Kalepi, recently committed to BYU a couple months back. Well, Siosua has been committed to Stanford for almost a year now. Could BYU bring him in on an official visit and convince him that he needs to join his twin brother in Provo? A guy like Kendall Wall is a recent riser when it comes to recruiting. He's a local prospect from Mountain Ridge High School up in Harriman, 6'5", 215-pound edge rusher. I watched his tape, and I really like his length and his ability to get after it. He's coming in on an official visit, and he's already got an 86 rating from 24/7 Sports. So just looking at the different players that are coming to visit BYU this week. And like I said, there's also, we've already talked previously about LaMason Waller. He's similar to Sam Turner, is according to 24/7 Sports composite rating, he is a four-star talent. The 24/7 ranking on him is an 88, so knocking on the door of a four-star talent. He's a wide receiver like Sam Turner. Could they be the two faces of BYU football going into the future if they were to pick BYU together? You also got Semi Talanga, who's coming to BYU from Modern Day High School down in Southern California. He's an undersized defensive lineman, but don't let that belie the offer list that he has got. So what I'm trying to say is, looking at all these different offers, Nusi Taumoepeo, another local kid from Westlake High School, quite literally in my proverbial backyard because I live in Saratoga Springs. He's visiting BYU after visiting Utah this past weekend. He's a three-star talent. Stevie Amar coming up from Oaks Christian High School down there in Southern California, one of the hotbeds of high school talent in Southern California. And then also Shelton Fuller, or Manny Fuller, some people call him, from El Paso, Texas. A guy like LJ Martin obviously would have a connection with him being from El Paso. So looking at all these guys, like I said, that's just a kind of a glance at all the different guys visiting this week. Is the BYU football, if they were able to go out there and land a bunch of these guys, they won't land all of them because let's be real, the recruiting process is an inexact science. And obviously young men have to make up their mind of where they want to play. BYU can only put their best foot forward and hope that these young men pick the Cougars. But the nice part is for each one of these young men is that if BYU starts to get some momentum on the recruiting trail and add some commits of some notoriety, like I said, notoriety is the wrong term, maybe of some renown is probably the better term, like Mason Wall or Sam Turn or some of these guys, I think that could start to turn the tide for some fans when it comes to the BYU football program, thinking, okay, they still got some things under control here. They're still recruiting at a pretty high level. We're not that far removed, everybody, from BYU's best ever recruiting class under Kalani Sitake. They finished in the top 50 last year in the 24/7 Sports rankings, the first time BYU's been inside the top 50 in quite some time. Kalani Sitake and his staff, they're hard at work. Don't think that they are sitting by and watching the BYU basketball program saying, wow, I wonder what they're doing that's so revolutionary. No, they're working hard. And I'll also add that BYU basketball is not sleeping at all. There's reports at NC State saying that they essentially have no playing time for a guy like Cannon Catchings, and I'm hearing some very positive things on my end about Cannon Catchings and the chances that BYU adds him. But they also just yesterday offered the number one recruit in the 2026 recruiting cycle, Brandon McCoy. He's a guard prospect out of Bellflower, California, in St. John Bosco High School, 6'4", 170 pounds. So that makes in the next two recruiting cycles for basketball, so in 2025 and 2026, Kevin Young has stepped to the plate and offered the top overall prospect in each of those recruiting cycles. Obviously, AJ DeBonsa is the top prospect in the 2025 class. So the basketball program is doing their thing. I think BYU football is absolutely getting after it. Now, football is a little bit more widespread with regards to the number of prospects you have to offer and obviously bring in on official visits because you have to fill out an 85-man scholarship roster versus 13 in basketball. But don't get it construed or don't get it misconstrued that BYU football is just standing idly by thinking, hey, we're good over here. They're working hard. Are they offering the top prospect in the country? No, they're not. And that may take some time, and if ever that they do that. But the other thing is Kalani Sitake's track record has suggested they will bring in 3-star talents and get 4 and 5-star talent, 4 and 5-star talent production out of those 3-star players. That's not a bad place to be. BYU basketball, similar to BYU football, similar to BYU basketball, is still going to need to be a developmental program, it feels like, in the long run. Now, you always have guys like Yegor Denim, who's going to come to BYU and expect to be a one-and-doner. But here's the thing with BYU basketball is Kevin Young may turn it into more of an NBA factory quicker than Kalani Sitake is turning BYU football, simply due to the nature, like I said, of the expanded roster. It's such a big roster for BYU football than it is for BYU basketball. But if BYU football goes out and has a relatively successful season, like I said, my benchmark for success this year for BYU, get to 6-6. You push that to 7-5 or 8-4. I think the good times are back rolling for BYU football. I think Cougar fans are going to be right back in rooting for BYU football as much as they do for BYU basketball. But once again, it's a big week ahead. Recruiting obviously is the lifeblood of every college program. And this week coming up for BYU football starting today could be one of the biggest in recent memory if they can land some of these top prospects they're hosting on official visits. All right, coming up here in just a minute, had a good friend of the podcast reach out to me. We talked Friday about private equity and how I think it could be a scourge. It might be a bad thing for the Big 12. Was I a little too hasty in making that claim? We'll talk about that next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role, my friends. That's why you guys need to check out LinkedIn Jobs. It has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster, and more importantly, they're doing it for free. The best part is LinkedIn is not just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively looking for a new position, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit or use other job sites. If you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. The best part is on LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses are getting a qualified candidate within 24 hours of their job posting on the site. Hire professionals like a professional and do it with our friends on LinkedIn. The best part is they're making things as simple as possible. They're always finding new ways to make the process easier. They just launched a new feature that helps you write your job descriptions, making the process that much easier and quicker. And 2.5 million small businesses are also using LinkedIn for their hiring needs. So why aren't you? Post your job for free today at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post that job for free. Of course, terms and conditions apply. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you for being with us. Are you sick of watching all the different networks out there, Fox and ESPN Sports, and hearing all the talking heads screaming and having to turn on the volume because of that? I want you guys to make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every single day, bringing the biggest stories without all the screaming going on those other networks. Locked On Sports today brings you the canvas analysis, opinions, and news that you need every single day, streaming 24/7 on YouTube and also free on the Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right. A couple of you reached out over the weekend. We were talking about private equity, mainly on our Locked On Cougars Insider group. And I had a chat with a good friend of the podcast. And trust me, he's as good of a friend as there is to this podcast. And let's just put it this way. He is well-versed in the world of finance and private equity and everything that's going on in the world that money entails. Now, money isn't all things. Let's be very clear about this. But we talked Friday about a potential private equity investment from CVC Capital Partners based out of Luxembourg into the Big 12 that could net between $800 million and $1 billion for the conference for a 15 to 20% stake in the conference. Now, I decried taking that money because I was afraid if it included the fact that they had decision-making power and they were able to come in and have their say on things, it might be the death knell for college sports, making it almost I don't know what I'm trying to say. That would make it really, really tough for any entity to really thrive. Well, as our good friend reached out and said this about this, let me pull up the text message I got from them. And the thing about it is this was a very good point. It says, it's a great article. He linked it to The Athletic. And I read the article from The Athletic, and their reporting says that the partnership between the Big 12 and the CVC Capital's CVC Capital partnership would entail they would have no say in athletics matters. They would not be able to come in and, let's say you don't like the direction the Big 12 is going, you throw Brett Yormark out on his tail and hire an interim commissioner to do your bidding. They would not have that say, according to this article. That allays a ton of the fears that I had about private equity. But there's a bigger point to be made here. And let me just read what we were talking about here. It says that private equity is an absolute no-brainer and great idea. I work in the world of finance and present value of money is impactful. So this explains itself as we go along here. Already involved in pro sports, and as the article points out, it would be an investment with no say in athletics decisions. If you can get $50 to $60 million today, absolutely get it done. Well, I've sent a follow-up question and said, okay, why? Explain to me why this is such a good thing. So this is the kicker here. Stay with me for a minute. Even if they had to say it would make sense, but they would be a minority owner. The overall why about this is about increasing value investment, aka the conference, in the next TV deal beginning in the early 2030s. Remember, it's a current 6-year deal that kicks in next year in 2025 and runs to the early 2030s for the Big 12 currently. He points this in the next TV deal, sponsorships and advertising revenue. It's an economic principle called time value of money. Now, once again, I said on Friday, and I'll reiterate it once again, I am a guy who is pretty well versed in a lot of things, but there's a lot of stuff I'm not well versed in. It's the world of finance is one of those. Who says this: money in my pocket today is always far more valuable than money down the road. If private equity helps you get 2 times or 2.5 times on your next TV deal versus potentially 1.4 or 1.7, even with the 20% stake going to that private equity group, the impact is massively positive and dramatically better for the conference and member schools. College sports is now pro sports. This is happening, and it will be great in the end. It's a very interesting point. The present value of money. So you're bringing in this money right now, and you're giving them that stake in the conference, speaking of CVC Capital Partners, with the whole intent that when you come to the next TV rights negotiation, when Brett Yormark leads the Big 12 into the next media rights deal, The idea is that stake that the CVC Capital Partners has bought in and maybe expanded at that point will make you that much more valuable to these media partners, whether that's Fox, ESPN, down the road, Netflix, Amazon, insert whatever streaming service you want to talk about or TV network. The whole idea is making you as attractive as possible while at the same time right now having extra cash on hand to try and close that gap with the Big Ten and the SEC. Listening to this, and like I said, this person, you know who you are. I trust you infinitely more than I trust myself. If that is sincerely the case, if the CVC Capital Partners have no direct say in athletics matters, they're simply putting a insertion of money into the conference, and it can pay off once again to get you 2+ times your money in the next media rights still. Yeah. That is the gold mine that the Big 12 is looking for. And once again, Brett Yormark, baby, on the forefront here, looking like an absolute visionary because he realized it was happening, because it is happening in pro sports. I can speak directly to Arctos Sports Group, which is a private equity firm, bought into the Utah Jazz. They essentially bought, as I understand it, the stake that the Miller family had held on to in the Utah Jazz after selling their stake, their majority stake, to Ryan Smith. They're all over it in pro sports. And I think Brett Yormark, with his background in professional sports, remember, he worked with the Brooklyn Nets. He worked in NASCAR. He understands what private equity can do for sports. And if he has essentially an infusion of cash now, $800 million to $1 billion to infuse in the conference right away, and at the same time, on the back end, it's going to double or triple potentially your money when it comes to media rights. Yeah, that's an absolute no-brainer. So I appreciate this individual. I'm going to leave them nameless because I don't think they want their name out there, for weighing in on this. And a couple of you have asked questions about that on our Locked On Cougars Insider group over the weekend as well. So hopefully that explains a little bit of why private equity might be the actual right play for the Big 12. And I will eat crow on this. Apparently, I was mistaken in speaking out. I was overall afraid of, let's say, the CVC Capital Partners buying into the Big 12, essentially having a major stake in play at the table that could force BYU and the other universities in the conference to do their bidding, essentially. If that is truly not the case, take the money and run, because absolutely the current impact of having money to close that gap with the Big Ten and the SEC, you absolutely cash that. And at the same time, you look at it on the back end and say, this could make us more attractive to media rights partners, thereby increasing our value when it comes back to the negotiating table the next time we have to talk with ESPN, Fox, and whoever else might be interested, TNT Sports, NBC, the streaming networks out there, Netflix, Amazon, and the like. So yeah, it's actually, if that is truly the case, I was wrong. I'll eat crow on it. And this is the right play for the Big 12. And once again, it shows that Brett Yormark understands far deeper than I think many people in college sports what some of these moves he's making. It's like he's playing chess when many are playing checkers. And that's another tip of the cap to him, because if this is how it's going to go down and what it can do for the conference, hey, props to you, Brett Yormark. Once again, you have kind of, like I said, you've lapped the field and showed the way for other conferences to move forward. And once again, if the Big 12 has success with this, you can guarantee the ACC, SEC, Big Ten, Mountain West, Sun Belt, every other conference will have a private equity stake at some point down the road. But the nice part is the Big 12 may be on the forefront of this and may get a bigger share from an equity firm that other conferences may get, because they simply were the first in the door to make that happen. All right, we'll finish up today's show with some BYU basketball thoughts. They got a commitment over the weekend for the BYU basketball program. Who is Max Triplett? What can he offer to BYU basketball? We'll delve into that coming up next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, summertime means baseball, of course. The NBA Finals might be wrapping up tonight. Stanley Cup Finals also are wrapping up potentially tomorrow with some 3-1 leads. But nonetheless, you can still have some fun all summer long and do it with our friends at FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Think about it. You can put the money potentially on Luka and the Mavs staving off elimination once again tonight. And if you win that $5 bet, you get $200 extra to bet on. I would tell you guys to take that money and put it on the futures odds for BYU football football. You think the Cougars are going to go over the 4.5 win total that FanDuel has for them right now? You can put that $200 on that and let it ride this season and see what it does for you guys. The best part is that's $200 you can use on bet on everything for the finals MVP, to who's going to hit one out of the park. And once again, if you want to bet on BYU football, the futures odds for BYU basketball, it's all available to you guys from our friends at FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list right now. Once again, it's FanDuel.com/lockedon and get started today. It's all courtesy of FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you've not done so already, would encourage you guys to sign up for our Locked On Cougars Insider Group. It's been a really, really fun way to interact with people, fans of the show, quite frankly. Had a conversation with our good friend Ryan of the podcast. We actually were golfing last Friday, by the way. And if you want to golf with me, hit me up. I always love hitting the links with our listeners. So if I've got time in my schedule, I'm happy to link up with you. Had a chance to catch up with Ryan, and he asked me about it. He said, JK, this text thing you got going on, does it legitimately send a text message? Like, yeah, it absolutely does. If I'm not mistaken, I think I showed it to you, Ryan. My back end, where I see it on my end, it comes in directly to me and it comes to you guys in a text message. The best part is it's 14-day free trial. You get 2 full weeks to see if it's the right option for you. Great interaction with the show, supporting the show as well. It's just $4.99 a month after the 14-day free trial. So I would encourage you guys to sign up today. Click on the link in the show notes below, whether you're watching and or listening to this, and join us today on our Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right. Before we go on today's show, BYU got a commitment for the basketball season ahead that comes in the form of Snow College transfer Max Triplett. He announced his commitment to BYU on Saturday. He said 100% committed. Very grateful to Coach Young and Coach Burgess and the rest of the staff for this opportunity. Go Cougars. Now, Max Triplett is going to be a walk-on with the BYU basketball program, according to multiple reports. So he is not taking up one of those final 2 scholarships that BYU has earmarked. At least one appears for Cannon Catchings. Like I said, I'll reiterate that I'm hearing some very positive things about BYU and Cannon Catchings. The funny thing about this is it feels like it could happen at any point, but until Cannon Catchings decides that BYU is where he's going to be, you have to wait until he makes that official announcement. But in the meantime, Max Triplett has picked BYU. What does he offer to the BYU basketball program? Well, he is a big body. 6'9" big man, was an all-conference player last year for Snow College and head coach Andrew May. He averaged 14 points and 7 rebounds. It was an uptick from his freshman campaign where he had 6 points and 4 rebounds on average. He reportedly had offers from Cal Poly and Southern Illinois with regards to scholarship offers, but he adds to BYU's depth in the front court. Once again, he is a walk-on, so I don't see much downside to this. If Triplett can come in and maybe be that emergency big that BYU maybe have to call upon at some point. Remember, last year, BYU would have liked to have had all 3 of their bigs healthy at any point altogether. Remember, Fousseyni Traore had a hamstring injury. You had a Tiki Alatiki with a broken thumb all year long. You had Ali Khalifa on a bum knee for most of the season. He was wearing a brace on and just playing through it. They never had a truly healthy front court. And that's the thing I got like Max Triplett. He may come and not offer a ton outside of the fact that he offers depth in an emergency situation. He comes in off the bench and can offer at least some size at 6'9" to come in and at bare minimum 5 fouls. I know that sounds bad to say because you don't want any guy to be kind of just a stiff, but he is an all-conference player, so that's a positive in that regard. He offered both offense and also some rebounding, so 14 points and 7 rebounds is nothing to sniff at. And once again, he's a walk-on. So he comes to BYU. He's paying his own way. He was a former star at Weber High School up in northern Utah, so he knows the quote-unquote lay of the land that BYU is. He served a mission before going to Snow, so I look at this as a very positive pickup for BYU. In many respects, I think this would be kind of a guy like Max Triplett. Not too long ago when BYU was in the West Coast Conference, he likely is a WCC scholarship player, and hopefully that makes sense. BYU understands, I think, that they're going after a need for a higher level of player to compete in the Big 12. I think Mark Pope understood that when BYU got into the Big 12 conference, recruited to that. I surely know that Kevin Young understands that because remember, we talked a little bit earlier on. He's offered the #1 recruit in the country in the next 2 recruiting cycles, and he's brought in 4-star talents like Yegor Denim, guys across the board. You think of Elijah Crawford that he's brought in already to this program. He understands he's got to get a higher level of player. And that doesn't mean that a guy of Triplett's caliber does not have a place at BYU. It just means that he's pushed down the roster a bit. He's a walk-on now, whereas I would think in the Dave Rose era of BYU in the West Coast Conference, Triplett probably would have been a scholarship player in the West Coast Conference. And that's not a bad thing to have a guy like that come into your program. But the Big 12 requires better talent, better players, and Max Triplett just happens to be a guy that can come to BYU as a walk-on, has passed on other scholarship opportunities, and wants to be a part of this program. That's a nice thing to have on your roster because, once again, the front court depth has been a big question mark for BYU. Outside of Fousseyni Traore and Keba Keita, who else do they got? You got Townsend Trimble, who's 6'8", but I don't consider him to be a big. I think Townsend Trimble is more in the mold of a Noah Waterman, where he's a wing player who offers just a little bit of size. So I like what Max Triplett brings to BYU, and anything he offers as a walk-on with this program, that's an absolute bonus to Kevin Young and KYU as they go into year 2 officially for the program in the Big 12, but year 1 for Kevin Young on the sidelines as BYU basketball's head coach. So there you go. That's what I got for you guys on this Monday edition of the show. I hope you guys are all having a fantastic start to the week. I am back to the grind. I had 2 weeks off on paternity leave, so I'm back doing my radio thing. So it's fun. I had a great little bit of downtime, but the season is about to get really going. We've got a Big 12 Media Days not that far off. I have plans to go to Las Vegas for at least one day when BYU is speaking the second day of Media Days. If I can make it down for both, I'll be sure to do that, but have plans for that. We're not far off from BYU training camp beginning. I think it's going to begin July 30th, ahead of the start of the college football season. So get ready, everybody. It's not that far off now. So big thank you to all of you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Thank you to all of you once again who are everydayers as well. And until tomorrow, everybody, have a great rest of your Monday. This has been the Locked On Cougars podcast.